In this video, I'm going to show you all the ingredients that I used to create my compost pile, as well as showing you all the turns that led to it becoming usable compost. I'll also be sifting the compost at the end to make it suitable for seed raising mix, as well as use the finished compost in our garden.
All right, we have wood ash from our wood fire. We've got shredded paper from the local school, a range of compost that's been sitting there some time, coffee grounds from the local cafes. We've got old bread from the cafes that they chucked out. It's been sitting here a little while now. We've got an old mustard that's past its use by date, so we'll chuck that in. We've got an old bone that I like to put through each compost just to sort of see it break down. We've got alpaca poo in there along with the straw. Egg shells, I think that's more compost. Yep. We've got chicken manure and more shredded paper, and we've got our cardboard. We've got just our veggie garden scraps of water. Our special ingredient, I use this to put the cappings on, the beeswax cappings, to let the bees take the excess honey. It's a bit of a mess, so what I'm going to do is put this on top of the compost once it's done to allow the heat to come up to melt and move the cappings and the beeswax and the remaining honey, and let that sort of soak into the compost. At least that's the experiment. We've got our grass clippings that come from various gardeners, both just home gardeners and professional gardeners. Let's start filling it. Okay, I'm getting close to finishing. I'm trying to make it as high as I can because it will reduce down. But so one thing I like about making compost is using up all the materials, or most of them, just clearing them all out, putting them all together, all the ingredients together in this pile, and then turning into soil. One of my least favourite parts really is tearing apart all of this cardboard. It just gets a bit much after a while.
Here's the Excel spreadsheet that I use just to record everything I can about the compost. So I usually give the compost a name. There's obviously the start date and today's date, which gives me the number of days that the compost has been active. I have the list of ingredients. Usually there's a standard mix that I have, which is really the compost that I'm doing at the moment. But sometimes I add other things that I haven't added before. And so I would put that in the list of ingredients. Sometimes I don't have enough to make a compost, like a complete one. So I build the compost and then let it sit there until I've got enough ingredients to top it up. Also record the date that I turn the compost. I'll also write down any observations that I make about the compost, whether I notice that it's too dry or too wet, just any observations that I think are important to read back on later. Also record the temperature of the compost before each turn. Also have a finish date so that I can record the number of days that the compost took to become compost. This helps me to try to perfect my compost piles, to obviously reduce the amount of days and to try and keep it as hot as possible for longer. The other thing I do is I record when I turn it from bay to bay, and so that I can keep track of each compost pile, the age of the compost pile and how it's going, so that I can read back on all the data just to see what's worked and what hasn't worked. It's day 2. I check temperature, and I forgot to add the meat bones to the compost, so we'll add that in. I'll dig a hole, put that in, and cover it back up. It's only been 2 days, so it should not be a problem. So it looks like my experiment worked, that the honeycomb and the cappings have melted off the plastic and going into the compost. Let's get a temperature and dig a hole and put the bones in. 73.5 degrees Celsius. I'll put the Fahrenheit on the screen. I'll just place the bones. I can't even get my hand in there, it's so hot. But I'll just give them in roughly. I'll cover them over. When we go to turn it, we can allow the bones to more evenly distribute around through the pile. Awesome.
So 2 days ago, so it was 2 days old, and I tested the temperature and it was 73.5 degrees, which I've since learned is a bit too hot. It stops the microbes from being able to really do their job. So it's now day 4, so I'm going to check the temperature. If it's still above 73, I'm going to turn it to just help release some of the heat. So it's hitting about 75 degrees Celsius, so I'm going to turn it 76 degrees. So I'll put the cappings on the underside of this plastic. Some of these more larger chunks hazards. In fact, I reckon we could render that and use that in candles. In the drier sections, I'm just adding a tiny bit of water just to keep the moisture content up, because in some areas it's a bit dry, and then I'll test it again in 2 days' time and see if the temperature has dropped into that sort of between 50 and 70 degrees Celsius. I'm going to just test the temperature of this compost further down. Yeah, it's very spotty. And when I pushed it all the way down, it was at 45 degrees. When I've just stuck it in here, it's going up to 65, so it's very inconsistent. Turning it like this just gives it the material opportunity to get further mixed together, and I think it'll help to create a more even heat throughout the pile. Maybe I'll put over 200 litres worth of water in this pile. It looks really dry. See the t-shirts I put in here soon. I normally don't make a compost as tall as this one, usually because I just build it. I usually don't wait as long to collect as many materials as I did for this one. And I've only recently been able to access the alpaca poo, which I think is really helping with creating the heat. Pretty standard for the green material to get compacted and a bit smelly at the bottom. So it's good to get it to the top of the pile and time to air out. I'll test it again in 2 days' time just to see where the temperature's at, and if need be, turn it back for a second time. It was hot in places and dry in places, so I've added a little bit of water to just have it more evenly moist. I'd normally put a lot more water in on the first turn, but because I've only turned it in 4 days instead of sometimes a week or two, I just decided to reduce the amount of water that I put into it, partly because it's quite hot. I don't know if I'm adding water will increase the temperature or adding the water will cool it down. I think it depends on other conditions, but overall I'm happy with how it's looking. All the materials that I added to the pile are, I like in the first turn, it kind of helps mix it all up again. It also allows for that compacted bottom third of the pile to loosen up, and normally it would be more compacted and more smelly if I was to turn it in a week or two. So turning it on day 4 actually enables that part of the pile to loosen up on the top of the pile, not smell as much and so on. Yep, so I'll leave it for a couple of days and test it again, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so we're day 6 now, so it's been 2 days since I turned it. So we're just going to check the temperature. Let's get that in there. It's steaming a good amount. To be honest, I'm hoping it's not too hot because I don't particularly want to turn it, but it's too hot. It's already at 75 degrees Celsius. I mean, it's probably going to be okay, but you sort of want, especially when you're making a video like this, you want optimal conditions. So 76, it's too hot. Good quality problem to have, I guess. Well, I'm going to turn it. Just over 76 degrees Celsius. I don't think I've ever had a compost that hot that I've recognised. But I blame the alpaca poo for getting us to that kind of temperature, which is a good thing. It's okay. That is almost difficult to touch. Just to try and keep it in that sort of 50 to 70 degrees Celsius. Yeah, look at that. There's a lot of more than one drip, so I'm not going to add water to that. I was not expecting that many drips, to be honest. It might be drier further down. No drops. I'm going to add just a touch of water. I guess it makes sense that a lot of moisture in that top sort of foot of compost because of all of the hot air rising. All that moisture is just sort of trapped underneath the plastic. Underneath that layer, I wouldn't say it's dry, but it does need a little bit more moisture. I don't want to make it too wet, so I just add just a little bit just to keep it going. The plan now is to turn it every 2 days if I need to, with the temperature. I'm liking how it's breaking down. I'm not smelling anything funky. We'll see what happens at the last third of the pile. I find when I make a video about these sorts of things, I tend to think about it differently. With there being an audience, there's sort of focus in a different kind of way. You notice things that perhaps when I'm on my own. Here's the boat. It's got some nice heat to it. Yeah, when I'm doing it on my own, I'm sort of just completing a task. I might be listening to something in my headphone or something, but making a video, you focus on it a little differently. It seems to be a lot easier to turn it the second time. Being able to get sort of bigger chunks of it's sort of settling down into itself a bit better for turning. I'm getting the first smells of something that's sort of on the funky side. No, not a concern though. I think what would have happened is if I didn't turn it day 2 and now on day 4, if I just left it a week, that bottom third of the pile would have been a lot more smelly and a lot more compacted. So what I might do this time around is not add any water to the top of the pile, as all of that water will come to the top with the heat and get trapped underneath the plastic, bringing the water to the surface. So I won't add any additional water to the very top of the pile. See what happens in the next turn. Just do a temperature check. We're going to get up to maybe, 55 degrees Celsius, which is a pretty good temperature. Between 50, 55 and 70 degrees is where we want to keep it, so 58. So I'll be back in 2 days to test the temperature again. If it's still above 73 degrees Celsius, I'll turn it again. Okay, it's been 4 days since the last turn. The compost is now 10 days old. So I'm going to test the temperature today and give it a turn, and also check, if you remember, I didn't water the top of the pile just as an experiment to see if the water that I put throughout the pile would raise up into the top layer and be trapped underneath the black plastic. So let's see how it all went. For some reason I'm always impressed at how much it reduces in size over time. I think when I built it, it was about that tall, and it looks like it's dropped about 2 feet. It's certainly wet, moist. So this was essentially somewhat dry when I turned it. And so all of that. Let's get a So I added no water to the top of this pile, and look at all of that water. It won't be that wet further down, of course. Let's get turning. But first I'll check the temperature. So after 10 days we're still sitting on, I'll probably go up a little more if I left it, but we're sitting on around 70, probably 71 degrees Celsius. Love seeing the steam rising off it. Once I've done that, I'm just spacing out. I think it helps. Yeah, I don't think I'll add water on this one. I think I'll add water on the next one. So usually the sides and the corners get dry over time. It's good to mix the pile because it sort of moves that dry material. It gets another opportunity to have some moisture added to it. Otherwise it just sits on the edge and it doesn't break down, and I try and turn well, either once a week or even once a month. I'm not going to get a drop out of that. So all of that water with the heat, all of that water just, I guess, is either like evaporating up, just that heat bringing that moisture up and then being trapped underneath the plastic. It just keeps that area quite wet. Okay, so I'll add some water now. It's certainly got the heat, but it's quite dry. I'm going to add more water, I think, in this turn than I have in the previous 2 turns. Be interesting if there's any funky smells in the bottom half of this pile. struck the giant bone. Looks like it's been, yeah, look at the steam coming off it. I think we've had this a couple of years. I'd just like to see what happens to it over time. It makes sense to try and turn it every 2 days, I think, because in a nice hot compost, with the sort of more open system, a lot of moisture escapes from the pile, and then a lot of it also rises to be trapped underneath the plastic, leaving the bottom 2/3 of the pile sort of slowly drying out. So makes sense to turn it every 2 days and add that moisture back in that gets lost. I'm noticing, because I wasn't able to do it 2 days ago, compared to the previous turn that I did after 2 days, it is a bit drier. There's the first smell of a little bit of unpleasantness. Well, I've done a PDC course and watched tons of videos and been working on the property for 8 years. My main way of doing it is intuitively. Quite dry. So rather than there be, like a whole heap of rotting organic matter at the bottom part of the pile, which I've had in the past, that's really smelly. It's just a few little pockets here and there of material that's just needs air, really. Gets compacted down the bottom third of the pile. I'm not concerned about the smell at all. I think it's another thing, like when you've been doing it for a while, you just figure out how to do it and you sort of learn along the way, a lot of it intuitively. But then when it comes time to talking about it, it's like, oh, how do we talk about what I'm doing? This pallet system is not all that expensive to put together. The main expense, there's two expenses. There's the star pickets and the pallets. A lot of people can get their hands on star pickets for free, but if not, I think they're like $8 or $10 each. And it's possible to get to get pallets for free, or just buy them cheaply from someone locally. So the other investment is space. We've got the space to put a system like this together. It certainly enables for a lot more volume. I don't think I'll add any more water at this point. I think what's important is to turn it and then just break it apart, loosen it up, allow the air to get back into it. When I get to the bottom of the pile, it just makes sense to use a shovel. So once again, just grab there won't be a drop. There's not a drop coming out of that. When we come back in hopefully 2 days, this top will be dripping with water. Just like to prepare this bay for when I turn it back. Alright, I'll try and get back here in 2 days and repeat process. Okay, we're day 14. This is turn number 4, and it's been 4 days since I've turned it. Let's get a temperature on it. I did test it, I think yesterday, and it was 73, 72. Yeah, let's call it at 71 degrees. So that's up at the higher end, but that's good. So we're getting a lot of moisture forming on the top, like we've seen in the previous turns. So I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing in this turn. Won't add much water to the first part of the pile. Keep testing the water content as we're turning, and just add a little bit more water to keep that moisture content up in the pile. I'm just going to check the water content here. Yeah, it's quite wet there. Yeah, won't add any water on this level, on this layer. Okay, this is going to be... I won't get a drop out of this, I don't reckon. No. So I think that if I was to turn it on day 2, there would have been more moisture in the pile. There's it's day 4. It's drying out. It's still got the heat, but not the moisture to keep it breaking down the way we want it to. If we look back on all of the ingredients that were initially put in the pile, you can see that it's well mixed together. Here's the bone. I enjoy putting it through. I'm curious actually if I add more water, if it'll actually obviously keep the pile moist, but actually reduce the temperature out of that 70 degree range into the mid 60s. Let's see if it gets into the mid 60s in the next turn. So I think I am noticing that that funky smell. And I think the reason is when I'm turning the pile, the top of the pile, which is quite wet, to the bottom of the pile, you know, we've got that compaction and excess water in that bottom, you know, like half a foot, which then smells a little bit. I'm not concerned about it, but that will be the reason. And I know you can turn the pile, taking the top layer off and sticking it in the center. You know, there's lots of ways of going about it to perfect it, improve it. But, I don't mind doing it this way. What I try to do is with every turn, so I've just turned a layer here, is where I've turned it from, it's drier on the edges than it is in the middle. So if I just turn the whole pile, that whole layer, and then move it around, and move some of that dry material to the middle and some of that wetter material to the back, it kind of mixes it all together, distributing the moisture around and layering around. So I'm happy with that. It's about finding the right process for your situation, you know, with your lifestyle, how often you can turn it, the materials you have available. So, you know, we could make the perfect compost, doing the perfect amount of turns and doing all of that perfectly to get, you know, it's going to break down anyway. Like the first pile I did in the previous video, it would have, and I'm pretty sure, I just can't remember, that I would have continued to work with that until I could put it in the garden in some way. I think I just stopped filming after that, when I stopped filming the video. Yeah, so we can do all of the 1%ers to do it absolutely right, spot on and perfect, but in reality it doesn't work that way. You know, you're busy, you can't come and turn it, it dries out a little bit, you try to make adjustments to that in the turn, and so I think in a way this pile I'm making is, you call it a reality compost rather than exactly how everyone should do it every time. So like the previous turn, I won't add any more water to the top part of the pile, just let the evaporation, the rising of the moisture throughout the pile to collect underneath the plastic. And I'd rather not use plastic, to be honest. This plastic breaks down really quickly in the sun. It's a pain. It certainly does allow you to control the pile, the temperature and the amount of water. And we had rain last night, which would have just made the top of that pile even more wet. So I think because I add any water to the bottom of the pile, or to the bottom, that's the first layer that I returned today. In the previous turn, because I didn't add any water to it, it's not as smelly. But you know, it's dry, so it's all a bit of a, not so much a guessing game, but maybe if I added a tiny bit of water to the bottom of the pile, it would be a bit more moist, but maybe a bit more smelly. I'm not too concerned about the smell. And yeah, I think I had one whiff of it today. So I think this will be the last bit of water. That's 3 cans, 3 10-litre Dryland cans, which is actually what I think I did last time. I do try to build it as big as I can at the beginning, because then we get a decent amount of volume out of it at the end. Curious what the temperature will be after the turn. So after turning it, adding water, which I think would also cause it to cool down initially. So the turning, the adding the water, about 51 degrees, which is still adequate temperature for compost, but so about 52 degrees. So that should go back up to maybe around 70 or a little lower, just because the pile's a couple of weeks old now, but yeah, we'll see. So the pile right now is 52 degrees after a turn. Let's see what it is when we go to turn it in hopefully 2 days time, but it may be 3 or 4. We'll see how we go. These bays will need some maintenance shortly. I have been maintaining them since I built them. A few things needed to be repaired from time to time, but might need to even replace the whole number of the pallets. If I do that, I'll make a video about it just to show you how easy it is to make one of these things. So here I'm adding the details of the 4th turn of this compost pile. So I add the date of the turn as well as the number of days it's been. So in this case it'll be 14 days. I add any additional observations that I've made during the turn, as well as the temperature of the pile before I turned it. And this just helps me keep track of everything that's been happening in the pile. Okay, we're day 17. This is turn number 5. After we turned it, it was 52 degrees, so interested to see how much it climbs after 3 days. So this has been 3 days since the last turn, and we've been just over 70 degrees for the whole 70 days, and the goal has been to try to get it just slightly under 70 degrees, just so it's at a more optimal temperature for the microorganisms to do their thing. So let's see how we're going. Get a temperature on it.
So we're sitting on 61 degrees Celsius. So that's dropped 10 degrees since the previous, the top temperature of the, before we turned it last time. So here we should get quite a few drips. Yeah, look at all that. No doubt it'll be drier further down. I'm sporting a bit of a cold today, so a bit of compost waits for no one unless it needs to wait. The last couple of composts, I think I said I'd be adding a little bit more water to the middle of the pile, but I never end up doing it. I think I'm just afraid of making it too wet. But I'm noticing with the alpaca poo, I can see it's still intact. It's just little round balls. I'm not sure what to make of that. The squeeze are still very nice and hot, actually. Did I get a drip? Yeah. Slightly, so that's, I think that's how we want it, actually. Clean the lines. Maybe because the pile's getting more, like it's reducing in size, the amount of water that's collecting underneath the plastic at the top is appearing to increase. So when I last tested the water content, we still were getting drips, but I don't know if we're going to get drips now. So the pile's getting a bit dry. It says it's organic cotton. I'm just surprised it hasn't broken down as much. I'm just smelling that smell at this bottom end. See if we've got much moisture here. Yeah. So once again, I won't add any more water to the top of the pile. Okay, so that was turn 5. We were at 70, 71, 72 degrees in the previous turn. Now we're at 60 below. So that's a reduction of about 10 degrees. Let's see what happens in the next turn. Still only added, I think, about 2 watering cans of water. So let's see how it goes in turn 6. Okay, we're day 21. I turned it 4 days ago. I've been a bit unwell, so I couldn't do it 2 days ago. So we're 4 days. The last time we tested the temperature, it was 61 degrees Celsius. Sitting on at 60, 61 degrees, which is really good. Probably quite a bit of water at the top there, as per normal. Yeah, she's slowly breaking down. Still noticing full pallets of alpaca manure, so I might need to just check how much people use alpaca manure for their compost. How well it breaks down when you're trying to do a fast hop compost. Hopefully see the steam coming off there. It's nice hot down there. You can barely touch it. It's starting to take shape though. Still a lot more breaking down to go. Continuing to go down in volume. Sometimes I like to just go around the edge
get the dry material. I know there's other more wet material in this, so I'll just add a little bit of water. Yep, still pretty wet. Going to get a drop out of that. I'll put a bit more water in this time around. I just feel it's too dry. The funky smell is gone. You see the bottom is not compacted like it usually is. It's quite light and fluffy. So I put about just under 4 cans of water this time around instead of 2 to 3. Now I won't put any more on top of the rest of this pile. Okay, we're day 23. This is turn number 7 that we're about to do. I think last time we were at about 61 degrees Celsius. Probably sit on at about 56 degrees Celsius, which is good. So this has been 2 days since the last turn, so I managed to get out here. Yeah, not as wet as it's been in the past. Still more than 1 drop. When I was originally going to make this video series, I was going to turn it once a week. But when I came and saw that it was over, what was it? Over 73 degrees Celsius, which is too hot. Sort of forced me to change my strategy and continue to turn it until it lowered its temperature. But now that we're 23 days in, and I've been turning it every 2, 3, 4 days, might as well keep it up. It feels a lot nicer to dig into and pull out. There's our bone. Yeah, it's breaking down over time. I've had it probably about 4 years, and it's breaking down. I did add, I think, about a watering can more of water in the last turn, just to try to keep it damper. Also, turning it now at day 2 is for day 4. I think we're catching it with more moisture in it. The reality is you just cannot always get out here every 2 days and turn it. The ideal, but it's not a reality. I was cooked for about a week. Just other life things that just sort of means you can't live as ideally as what you would like, or as I would like. It's breaking down nicely. Test the water. Don't think I'm going to get a drop, so I will add a bit more water to it. Because I'd been saving up material for like 4 to 6 weeks, I sort of had an abundance, so I was able to build the pile a lot higher than I normally am able to. And I also had the alpaca manure, which is a new addition to the pile. So those 2 factors meant I was able to create a nice hot pile, a lot hotter than normal, which sort of promoted it and turned more regularly to just reduce the temperature to a more ideal temperature so the microorganisms didn't die or get really slowed down by the excess heat. You can still see intact alpaca manure. I'm wondering if it's still got complete alpaca manure still in it. If that'll be fine for the soil, because it'll just break down in the soil. I added water to the first layer of this pile today. I'm not smelling anything, and it's starting to look really good. A little bit to the top. So we used 2 cans for this one. I think if it was done in 4 days' time, it would be 3 cans, I think. This is how it's looking. So it's getting a lot darker. Okay, it's day 26, and this will be float number 8. The last time we tested the temperature, it was 56 degrees Celsius. Starting to darken up, I'll show you in a minute. 52 degrees, still just in the range of where we'd want it. Be wet. I did add a little bit of extra water. Now the pile is a lot more moist than it has been. I'm a little reluctant to put water in it, even though I'm not getting that one droplet. I think I might just turn it this time and see what happens. See how we go as we get further into the pile. The lightest of sprinkles. I learnt that alpaca poo can be put directly onto the garden. It doesn't heat up like chicken manure does. So even if the alpaca manure doesn't fully break down in this compost pile, it's going to be completely fine to use in the garden. Thinking about breaking down. The lightest of sprinkles. It looks like alpaca manure is good, and that you don't need it to completely break down for it to be useful. But I think it would certainly help to add heat to the pile. So it's like it'd be a safe manure, more user-friendly. As you can see, it's starting to look nice and dark. It's certainly getting there. All right, I've dropped the ball a little bit with the compost. It's been 13 days since the last turn. So when we last turned it, it was 26 days old, and it was 52 degrees Celsius. So this will be turn number 9, and it's day 39. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at it. We'll test the temperature. Just have a look at the consistency of the pile, and turn it, and take it from there. But I'd imagine that it's pretty much gone cold. Yeah, it's going to sit on about 25 degrees, so it's gone cold. Have a look at it. Yeah. So getting 4 or 5 drops out of the top of the pile, which is where a lot of the moisture ends up, with it evaporating up into the plastic. And what happens when you use old boxes is there'll always be a bit of plastic that you don't see, which becomes obvious when the pile's breaking down. You can just get rid of that. What I might do is get the red watering can, the special ingredient, which is basically like 2 parts special ingredient. What would that make it? 8 parts water, just to try to get some heat back into the pile. But let's just turn it and we'll take it from there. I usually, in like the last 6 months, my piles would normally take about 60 to 70 days to break down, and that's with turning it once a weekish. And I don't really only turn it 5 times, and I think just that extra time of it sitting there gives it time to break down further. I actually think this would be fine to put out into the raised garden beds. I'd like to break that down for longer. Still see the brown materials in it, and that's usually for me how you can tell it's ready, is nothing of the original ingredients that you put into it are recognizable. And that's true for this pile, except for a little bit of the brown material, bits of I'm not sure if it's grass or what it is, I can't remember. It's looking good, it's nice and dark. Yeah, just got busy with other things, and other priorities came into play over the last couple of weeks, so I've just left it. She's looking nice. I'm not getting that drop out of there. What I'm going to try to do is add some of the special ingredient and some water just to try to warm it up a little bit. Because I do this, I've done composting just on my own and intuitively. When it comes to like making videos and talking about it, it's quite hard to translate that intuition into words, because it's just trying to articulate what's been an intuitive process. It's a bit challenging, but it's almost like when I wasn't making videos, what would I do right now? But because I'm making a video, I don't know, it causes you to think about it differently. You can still see the alpaca manure. Just sort of tells me that if we put it directly on a raised bed, it's going to take some time for it to break down. And maybe that sort of acts like a slow release fertilizer for the pile. Okay, so I'm not getting a drop out of this part of the pile, which tells me it's a little dry, and there's still material that needs to break down. So I feel like I do need to add some nitrogen just to hopefully bring the heat up in the pile a little bit to continue to break down the rest of the material. So that's my thinking at the moment. And the thing is, I think, is just not to overdo it and make it too wet. So I'm just going to just add a little layer at a time. Yeah, you can sort of see it's drier in the middle of the pile. So I think once we've turned the pile, aha! So our t-shirt has certainly started breaking down. Not as much as I would have thought it would have, but we'll keep it in the pile. Any t-shirt or material that sort of comes out the other end not quite broken down, where there could still be material to break down, I just put it through the system again, and anything that won't break down will just remain at the end, and I just chuck that in the bin. Looking a lot darker and broken down obviously compared to when we started. So I've not actually done a pile where I've turned it every 2 or 3 days. I did drop the ball on this pile as well, but I did turn it every 2 to 3, 4 days for the first 26 days. I turned it 8 times. This t-shirt's starting to break down. I think this was the one that said organic on it. I can't remember 100%, but it's starting to fall apart. Remember putting a pair of jeans through the system once, and there was nothing to be found. Yeah, it all broke down. There's something very satisfying about clearing out a compost bay. So let's see if we can generate a little bit more heat out of the pile by adding the special ingredient. So what we'll do, well, I'll come back in 2 days' time just to see if it went above 25 degrees, just adding a little bit of water and the special ingredient, just to see if it's going to heat up. And I think adding that little bit of water, well, it was about 1.5 cans, watering cans of water, just to keep it a little bit more moist, because it was, except for that top 1 or 2 inches that usually holds the water, the rest was a little dry. So I think adding the water is a good idea. See if we can break it down some more, and we'll take it from there. Okay, it's been 44 days. The last time we turned it, it was 25 degrees, and it was 5 days ago that I turned it, and this is turn number 10. So let's see how it is. Yeah, so we've got 19 degrees Celsius, so she's gold. Lost all the heat out of it, but I think this is actually fine as a compost in and of itself. It'll continue to break down and add nutrients to the soil. So I think in that sense it's good to use. I'm just used to it looking more broken down than this. So I think maybe, so there's that sort of toss-up between turning it 5 times over a longer period and having it broken down more, or turning it, this will be my 10th time if I turn it today, so turning it 10 times in a shorter period to get this result. The reality is I've got 3 other piles here that need to be used theoretically before this one. So I could use that compost over there and then turn these over, or just use these 3, and then start turning that towards the final bay, and by then it would have broken down more, sort of matured, if you like. I actually don't think it matters either way whether I was to use this now or slowly turn it towards the final bay and then use it in like a couple of months' time. I don't think it would really matter. There's probably pros and cons, but I don't think there's like a right or wrong way forward. So I think between turn 8 and 9, it was like a 2-week gap, and at that point it was like 55 degrees, and then when I tested it over 2 weeks later, it was 25 degrees. So that was really where I dropped the ball. I had other stuff going on, I just couldn't get to it. But I think if I continued to turn it during those 2 weeks, every 2 to 3 days, it probably would have maintained some of that heat and broken down more. So that's probably where I let the compost down. But in any case, I think this is very good to use, because I would just put that straight on the garden, as opposed to go through the process of sifting it for like seed raising mix. Compared to what we started with, that is, putting that as a top dressing on our raised beds would just be beautiful. But if I do the whole squeeze test thing, it firms up, and you like to see that. I don't think I'm going to turn this. I don't think it's going to do a lot of good at this point. When I actually do use this, we can compare it now to then in the future, and figure out the best way to apply it to the garden. Okay, so this is our sifted compost. This has been here a little while now. Needs a top up. So we'll use the compost that I've just made. Let's sift that and top this up. I've been going through a bit of this actually by growing wheatgrass. So I just put maybe 2 centimeters of soil in these trays, and then I soak the wheatgrass in water for 24 hours, and then I empty the water out and I just let them sit for 2 days, and then they start to sprout. And then I just put them directly on the soil, as you see there. And then eventually, because we're in the middle of winter now, so it's a bit cold, but I leave them out here for 4 or 5 days. You see they're starting to come up there. And then I grow them for about a week inside and then feed them to the chickens. So let's top this up. So it's been 112 days since I first started this compost, and it was 73 days ago that I did the last turn. We've had a lot going on, so I decided just to leave this compost to break down. So what I'm going to do today is sift this to make it available for seed raising mix. What I'll do is sift it, and any material that's a bit just not quite getting through the sifter, I'll just throw back into the next compost. So I've been sifting this for a few minutes. It's not broken down in places as much as I'd like. This is still a bit damp and not going through the sifter. It's brown heavy, this compost. So this is the first time I've done turning it every 2, 3, 4 days for those first 3 or so weeks. Normally I just make a pile, leave it 3 or 4 weeks, then turn it, then so it's like a 5-month process. But this has happened before. What I'm going to do is this material here that's just, I think would be actually fine to go back out, to put on the top of a raised bed. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this material into the compost that I'm building now, and just let it go through again to continue to break down. I've sifted, I reckon, maybe 2/3 of this, of what I put on here, and I'll show you that. So it's a success in that regard. But this I'm just going to put into the next compost pile. So this is the material being sifted. So where I think I went wrong with this pile was after that 3-week period when I left it for 2 weeks, when it was still at, I think, about 55 degrees Celsius. Leaving it, not turning it for those 2 weeks and getting the most out of that heat slowed down the breakdown of the pile, and just didn't complete the process. That's my take on it. But every compost attempt is a successful compost attempt. It will all eventually break down. One of the reasons I like to sift the compost, or sort of a byproduct, is I like to get the bones that have gone through the compost, all the cartilage and bits and pieces have come off in the process. And I'm going to attempt to gather a whole heap of bones together and burn them into an ash, get a more concentrated bone ash, I think that's what you call it, and then use that in the garden somehow. So that'll be an upcoming video. Another good reason, another good byproduct in the sifting is getting out any bits of sticky tape, plastics that have somehow made it into the pile. Sort of cleans it out, and as well as it just makes a nice, the sifted compost is good to touch, and just helps it along. So this is what's left of from that t-shirt. I think we found our bone. So that's how much it's broken down. That was sort of see it. It was probably soft, but it was intact. So it's slowly breaking down, and I'll put that. Yeah, it sort of crumbles off. So I'll put that in the next compost.